I'm gonna do something a little bit different in my video today. Normally, I would just pick a specific artist and try to recreate their style. But in this video, I'm not focusing on any particular artist. Instead, I'm gonna attempt to produce a specific subgenre of rap. If you've never heard of the funk subgenre of rap music, you've obviously never stumbled across the innumerable channels dedicated to this type of music on YouTube. These songs often appear in long, drawn-out playlists, most commonly featuring videos of dashcam footage in what appears to be Japan. From what I can tell, this genre is basically just a mashup of jazz music samples and trap drums, usually with some sort of trap vocals laid over top of it with a high-pass filter to give them a lo-fi sound. Anyway, let's get into the cook-up. The first thing to do is to find a jazz sample. This part of the process is my least favorite. It usually takes up the most time and is pretty much wholly dependent on luck. Sometimes you find a dope sample right away, other times you can click on countless videos for hours, only to realize you've wasted your entire day, which can lead you to question what the hell you're doing with your life. So for that reason, I like to just throw on a playlist and listen to it while I do something else. If something catches my ear, I'll download the song and use it in a beat. I find this is the most efficient and effective way to find a suitable sample. If nothing usable comes up, well, at least I didn't sit at my computer for hours clicking on random YouTube videos getting nothing done. I found this track called Nostalgia. The first part of this song stood out to me, so I figured I could turn it into something. I downloaded the song and dragged it into Edison. I highlighted the loop that I wanted with Edison and I dragged it into the playlist. The sample is supposed to line up with this mark here, so I time stretched the sample until it lined up properly. Now I can change the tempo of the project to anything I want and the sample will stay locked in place. I like to have 2 copies of the sample and wide pan them left and right. You don't have to do this is just my personal preference. If you notice when I play it now, it sounds different. The key has changed, and I didn't want that. So to fix this, change resample to tonal in the channel's time stretch settings. And the volume is also too loud and we're clipping, so we're gonna turn that down. I added this open hat. I made this hat pattern. I laid down this snare. I layered that snare with this snare. I added this trap snare for extra bounce. I added this triangle. I added these sleigh bells because I noticed they make a frequent appearance in these types of tracks. I laid down a kick. Here's my 808 pattern. Now this is what everything sounds like together. I didn't like the way the sample sounded with the drums, so I decided to chop it up. Now it sounds like this. I like this speech from Tyler, the Creator, so I'm gonna use it in the intro section of my beat.
You don't place so much importance on language, though, because I know you have friends like Frank Ocean.
That's pretty much everything for the beat. Here are a few things I did while mixing the beat. I put a low cut on the sample and boosted the mids. I automated an EQ for the intro section and cut the lows and highs. I used some sidechain compression on the sample and linked one to the kick and the other to the snare. I added the Isotope Vinyl plugin to further reinforce the lo-fi feel on the intro. I think this plugin is free and I'll link to it in the description of the video if I remember. Now it's time to write some lyrics. But this time I'm not going for anything specific, so there's nothing to break down. I'm just gonna write some random stuff. Oh, and before I forget, I've had multiple comments asking me to show my vocal mixing process. I'm not an engineer, so I don't know exactly what I should be doing here, but this is what I do. On my main vocal track, I add a compressor. I usually use FabFilter's Pro C compressor, and I use the aggressive preset. I add an exciter to my vocals and just play with the sliders until I get it to sound how I want it. Normally, I'd also have an EQ here, probably before the compressor, but pretty much anything I would do with an EQ here would be undone later, and we'll get to why that is in a second. Then I add a limiter. I set the ceiling to -4 decibels, and I pull up the gain until the limiter starts doing its thing. Then I add a little bit of reverb. On my dubs, I do pretty much the exact same thing. I start with a compressor. Normally, I'd also EQ these, but not today. And I throw a limiter on it. This time, I'm setting the ceiling to -6 decibels. Then I add some reverb, and lastly, I add a stereo imager. I like to mix my dubs so that they're a little wider and fill up more space than the main vocal, so even though they're quieter, they fill up more space and add more presence to your main vocal when they come in. Just for comparison's sake, here's what the stereo image of my main vocal looks like. Now here's what the stereo image of my dub looks like. Notice how much fatter the dub is. Okay, and finally for this track, I linked both of my vocal tracks to a bus track, and I put an EQ on them, cutting out all of the lows to give it that lo-fi feel. This is why EQing earlier would have been pointless. A large portion of the frequencies I normally mess with are cut. Usually I'd low cut somewhere between 50 and 100 hertz. I'd subtract a few decibels around 400 hertz, and I'd boost around 2.5 kilohertz. But here on the vocal bus, I'm cutting everything below 500 hertz, so most of my normal EQing techniques would be cut out and rendered pointless. But I'm still boosting around 1 to 2.5 kilohertz. Alright, let's see how the track sounds. And of course, I'm gonna include some obligatory dash cam footage to set the mood.
You don't place so much importance on language, though, because I've heard you use the F word. So,
Yeah, well, see, that's the thing. See, that's just a word that you could take the power out of that word. It's, to the way that I see things, you chose to be offended.
Hit your bitch up on the phone, tell that hoe to call me. I'ma stick my dick up in her throat, tell your man I'm sorry. I won't stop for no one.